This is the BioCentury Show. The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the 10th China Healthcare Summit. For a decade, BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company have organized a healthcare summit for biopharma and medtech leaders to discuss cross-border collaboration, investment, and the bridge to innovation in China. For our 10th anniversary, we return to Shanghai to resume in-person networking, live panels, and debate. Join us November 2nd and 3rd for a program designed for C-level executives and investors.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I'm Jeff Cranmer, Executive Editor of BioCentury, and today I'll be speaking with Panacea Ventures' James Huang about the state of the capital markets for biopharma and the latest trends in cross-border biotech deals. James is the founding managing partner of Panacea Venture, a firm with offices in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and the San Francisco Bay Area that incubates, builds, and invests in biotechs in Europe, Asia, and the US. Last fall, the firm raised a $276 million fund to deploy in sectors spanning biopharma, diagnostics, medical devices, and healthcare IT. Before James founded Panacea in 2018, James was a managing partner at Kleiner Perkins China, as well as Vivo Ventures. He also held senior roles at GSK, BMS, and Alza, among other biopharmas. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Well, James, we're finally starting to see some signs of a thaw in the capital markets. Follow-on financings are picking up. Some biotechs are starting to test the IPO waters. We just had a couple of big companies file to go public on NASDAQ last month. But many companies out there are still running on fumes after this prolonged biotech bear market. From your perspective as a global investor, I'm curious, what's the state of the capital markets for biotechs right now? Have we turned the corner?
Well, let's break up the capital market in three different regions. In the Greater China region, in the European region, and the United States. Because we're a global venture firm, we are looking at deals in both private and public across the three regions. Just for the audience understanding, we have taken a classic dumbbell approach. We invest at the earliest part of the venture in the pre-A and Series A stage, and we also invest on the public side on the other end. As a firm, that's really our mandate. So when we look at the capital market overall, whether it's a private and public, I think the three different regions really are different. I think the United States are the first market that we believe will recover from the recent downturn. As you have a point alluded to, we're seeing a little bit hint of hope. But still, the dislocation between public and private is so apparent. When we look at the overall capital market on the public side, we continue as an industry trading at basically enterprise value divided by cash, but barely above 1. This is the worst we have seen probably in around 2 decades within biotech. It's the worst we have ever seen. But we're starting to see a little bit of the recovery. It's exemplified by the follow-on financing that has become extremely strong. But yet on the private side in the United States, we're still seeing very few deals getting done. In Europe, both on the public and private side, we have seen no sign of recovery. In the Greater China region, it's the worst it's ever been. In fact, this is the first downturn for biotech within that region, because if people look at back in the history in that region, we really have just started to see innovation in recent years. In fact, the biotech industry as a whole was developed just in the past decade. And so there's a lot this industry is still learning from this first downturn. So within that public and private capital market, the only thing we're seeing at the moment is government funds playing an active role in funding the private biotech companies. But there's really no sign of institutional investors jumping in at the moment.
Now, that's a really interesting point that you bring up. Some of our viewers in the US and Europe might not realize, I mean, biotechs have gone in and out of bear markets for some time now in the US. Everyone remembers the genomics bubble bursting 2008 in the late teens, and right now just starting to come out of it. But in China, really, this is the first time, as you point out. And I'm curious, as a firm with quite a few portfolio companies in China, how have you been advising your companies to weather this storm?
Yeah, so one of the things we have done as a firm in the past 5 years is we work with the local biotech companies within the Greater China region is making sure, number one, they are, although they reside initially in China, they develop their infrastructure globally with their eyes set on becoming a global biotech company. And that have always been one of the most important advice that we give them. So roughly about a little bit less than 40% of our overall portfolio reside in the Greater China region, including Taiwan and Hong Kong. So that was the first advice we give them is make sure you set your eye on becoming a global company so you can tap into the global capital market that's part of the company's scale up. The second part where we really try to help them focus on is capital efficiency, meaning that, to the extent possible, build your infrastructure in such a way that you can become extremely efficient. So many of our companies within that region, although initially they conduct clinical trials within China, but as they file the IND in the United States and other places, they actually conduct their clinical trial in countries like Australia and New Zealand, and places where they can get tax credit. That's actually extremely important so that they become much more capital efficient as they become a global company. Number three, one of the things we make sure they understand is that not all money is equal. Meaning that if you do decide to take on capital from the government fund, there's actually commitment that you actually have to spend that money in whatever the local government region that give you capital, but be very careful because a lot of times in taking that capital, you actually have to build infrastructure to meet the demand and the objective of that capital. And so those are some of the advice we give them. Now, if you're sitting on a manufacturing facility, as you need that capital to do so, then build the infrastructure accordingly because you are at the place within the life of your firm that makes sense. But don't take the money for the sake of taking the money, because a lot of times you end up spending more money in order to meet the objective of that local government's demand. So those are some of the advice we give to our companies. And finally, as they think about building into a global company, they must think about the management structure. That's important. And so we encourage our company to really build their management team to be much more global. So for our companies in the United States, for example, if they are setting up infrastructure in China, then they will incorporate within their management structure Chinese nationals and team on the ground to do so within China. In the same way, if they're in China trying to become global, they build their U.S. subsidiary, they will also incorporate Americans as part of their management structure. So those are the advice that we have given to our firm through this process.
Well, I'm curious, looking at it from the other side, you just raised a couple of funds. I know I said at the top it was one fund. It's actually a couple of funds. Congratulations on that. But given the fundraising environment, I imagine your LPs must have had some questions for you. What sort of conversations did you have to have with LPs about deploying a fund in this environment? And are you also seeing new sources of money supporting your funds?
Yeah. So obviously, when we came out Quantum Perkins, the majority of our limited partners within our first fund is the classic Quantum Perkins LP base. And for our second fund, we have added to it. We've been very fortunate that when we raised both Fund 1 and Fund 2, our funds were oversubscribed in both cases. And the message that we actually deliver to our limited partners is that to make money in venture, capital efficiency is extremely important. And what this means that as we build our companies from the very beginning to eventually to an exit and to a point where the company is not only viable, but thriving, capital efficiency is extremely important. What does that mean? For companies, we have to go back to the basics. When you look at your research capability, your development capability, how do you build your infrastructure? How do you spend your money in such a way that you can achieve maximum efficiency? So for whether your companies reside in the US, in China, or in Europe, that should not be any different. So when you think about your research, where do you get your best medicinal chemists? Where do you get your best molecular biologists? They can work cohesively to find the lead candidate. And can they actually outsource to third parties that can do a job better and cheaper? So we have companies with different business models as we look across almost 40 companies globally. In some cases, they are building their medicinal chemistry capability, but for the rest of the chemistry capability, they are outsourcing to China. There are companies in the US, for example, in China, for example, they build their basic infrastructure in research. But when they get to development stage, when they're thinking about translational medicine, actually, the United States is the best place to do so. So as they find the lead candidate, they start building their infrastructure in the United States. And so, and we really believe that research and development has no boundary. In fact, you look at the root of biotech from the academic institution perspective, the scientific research that in the relationship collaboration that's built between US and China, you can date back to the past more than 2 decades. In fact, today, our academic institutions, the laboratories, they work cohesively to collaborate to find the best drugs within our industry. And so if you take a look at that, you have to think about the fact that when we build companies, we really have to think about building our companies globally. So as a venture firm, that's one of the reasons why we build also our partnership across 20 partners reside in different parts of the world so that we can help our portfolio companies to truly become global. That's a business model we have. And when we share a lot of our success stories with our portfolio companies, our limited partners get it. They understand. So we have examples of companies. For example, we have a company in cell therapy. They have more than 70 employees globally. They have research in Europe. They have development in China and in the United States. 70 employees. They burn less than $7 million in a given year, pushing through more than 5 clinical programs. Very few companies can do so at that kind of the capital efficiency. So we have stories after stories that we can share with our limited partners. These companies continue to advance in their development and the way they build a company. So those are some of the things that I can share with you, Jeff.
Well, one thing, James, that I imagine must also be on their mind and your mind as a global investor and building these companies across borders. Geopolitical tensions have been high and continue to be high between Beijing and Washington. Case in point, early August, the Biden executive order limiting U.S. investment in Chinese tech being one of the most recent examples. How are these tensions affecting the flow of cross-border investments and really how you build companies across borders?
Thank you for asking, Jeff. I was so relieved this year when the Biden administration made a decision that biotech as a whole is not part of national security concern, right? So if you take a look at the administration's agenda, what they're worried about is national security. They have really focused on areas that they felt like artificial intelligence, semiconductors, areas in which they really feel will affect national security for the United States. We're so relieved to see that the majority part of biotech was not affected. So at least for within our investment areas, we have not seen any of our areas being affected. As a firm, we actually made a decision a couple of years ago to not make an investment in the artificial intelligence area. That we actually early on we had felt maybe an area that may subject to a lot of restrictions. Today, in hindsight, to look at it, we believe we were correct. If you take a look at more than 270 AI companies in the United States, there are equally just as many, believe it or not, in the Greater China region that are deploying AI as part of their drug research. We have tried to shy away from that. So as a firm, we continue to believe that at the end of the day, you have to respect the geopolitical tension. But within that, the compound or those restraints, we focus on areas where it's not affected by that. And fortunately also for us, we don't raise large funds. Our most recent funds of $276 million, I believe now within biotech, all the biotech funds is considered extremely small. So in the early part of in a lot of deals we focus on, we try to shy away from those areas that may be restricted.
Well, thanks for that, James. That's probably a good stopping point for us. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back to talk about deal making in biotech.
It has been 4 years since most Western executives met with biotech leaders in China. During that time, deal-making between China and the West has increased. China biopharma companies continue to in-license innovation, extending the financial runway of Western biotechs. And now, Western biopharmas are finding innovation in China, helping to fill pipelines. This November, it is time to meet again in Shanghai, at the C-suite level. Join BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company for our 10th China Healthcare Summit. Register today at biocenturychinasummit.com. Can't visit Shanghai? Register instead for an all-digital pass.
I'm back on the BioCentury Show with James Huang, founding managing partner of global life sciences VC Panacea Venture. James, I'd like to turn to deal making. China Biotechs in-licensing rights to Western companies has been a staple among cross-border deals for the past few years. Last year, though, Western biopharmas have struck 7 times as many deals to access Chinese tech compared with a decade ago. So even with this rising geopolitical rhetoric that we just discussed, this year's on track for an increase in those deals west in licensing from the east. For example, BioNTech alone has done a series of deals to tap innovation from Chinese biotechs, companies such as Duality and Biotheus. Can you speak a bit to this evolution in cross-border deals that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think really, like I said earlier on, biotech industry as a whole was very much developed in the past decade within the Greater China region. And what a lot of the Chinese-based biotech were very good at is developing me too's, right? So for every target, whether the PD-1, TIGIT, whatever you name it in the alphabet soup, there are 20 or more such companies developing the assets. What they're very good at is really, from both chemistry and biology perspective, is coming out with molecules, so very good me too molecules. And certainly within the United States, you're now seeing the US-based companies try to license those assets as part of development, because the Chinese biotechs have become so good at even developing best in class. I think that's one area you must watch within the Greater China region. It's not only the US-based biotech companies that are doing so, the large pharmas have taken notice. And so you have seen a lot of the big pharmas doing so. But what people need to watch out is in the coming 10 to 20 years is within China, they will come up with first-in-class molecules. We already starting to see that. Big pharmas are also noticing that. So they're extremely active, actually, on the ground, looking at a lot of companies within China. So recently, we met with one of the largest pharmaceutical companies, when they look at our entire 40 also portfolio companies, of the company that were interested in digging into more information, learning more based on the pipeline, I was quite struck by the fact that even though China represents less than 40% of our overall portfolio, actually within the companies that they were interested in learning, China actually represents roughly about 2/3 of the companies they were interested in learning more about. That's because the companies that we have bet on within the Greater China region are companies that are truly developing first-in-class novel targets, looking at new chemistry, new platform. And so what does that tell you? Is that Big Pharma is really taking conscious effort in looking at those companies. And so they're not only having their team on the ground looking at those companies, they're also working, looking into venture firms such as ours that has a foothold also in that region. I personally believe this trend will continue. As you alluded to, we saw in this year 7 times more activity than in the past 10 years ago. I can reassure you, next year you'll probably look at 10 times or more. You at BioCentury have this East and West Summit. You were the first one to recognize the cross-border companies within our industry, and you have summit in which that's very well attended. I can reassure you, as you have this summit coming up in Boston, next year you do your meeting again, you are going to be able to find more and more of such deals that are truly cross-border. We as a firm right now, across our 40 portfolio companies, we have more than 5 such deals ongoing that are under discussion, whether they are acquisitions, they're licensing. We're seeing more than 5 of these. We also as a firm believe that next year we'll see equally or more of such deals across our portfolio companies. There's no stopping this train. It's going past, it's moving faster and faster. Either people recognize it and do something about it, or they will be left behind.
One thing I'm curious about, James, we didn't talk specific indications. China is now well known for oncology. There's so many oncology companies. We've seen the in-licensing companies build up their portfolios. We've seen companies go from me too to starting to develop some best-in-class and first-in-class oncology assets. What other areas are starting to attract the pharmaceutical companies who are sniffing around the various biotech hotspots and research hotspots in China?
I think one area that where the big pharmas are really looking into is gene editing, because gene editing has incredible application above and beyond just oncology, right? So you can think about gene editing in the different therapeutic areas, as well as as a platform, how it could evolve above and beyond just therapeutics, but also into agriculture and other areas. So that's really one area that we have seen big pharmas looking into gene editors that's outside of the traditional US-based companies. Because in China, there are certain companies in that space that are actually quite advanced. Another area that we are seeing is really in the area of cell therapy, above and beyond oncology. Mm-hmm. Cell therapies in many ways could be actually be applied to other therapeutic areas as well. This is an area where China truly has an advantage, because investigator-sponsored studies within China has become an area where a lot of the innovative companies can actually try their therapies in patients first and continue to refine their therapies until they're good and until they're ready for true IND in the United States. China has provided a ground in which a lot of companies can do so. This is one area where I believe Chinese companies have certain advantages because they're able to try the therapies first in patients. Well, but part of it is just because within cell therapy, one thing we have noticed over the years is that animal models are not very good predictor of efficacy. So as a result, a lot of the companies are skipping these animal studies and just go straight into patients within China. And China allow you to do so because a lot of the therapies they can only have survival for a certain period of time, right? So many years ago, Chinese government allowed a lot of the institutions to the investigators to actually sponsor a study so that when patients fail a lot of the therapies on the marketplace, they can quickly try these new therapies to be able to survive. And so China really have that advantage because that they can actually they really encourage investigator-sponsored studies in such a way that patients have access to new therapies. I think that's also another area where pharmaceutical companies, multinationals, are really looking into some of the new therapies that have been developed within the Greater China regions. So those are two areas where I've really seen incredible advances. One of the new areas is probably gene therapies, and that has more to do with the fact that the cost of goods for gene therapy is so high in the United States, where in China they can actually have similar type of therapy developed at a fraction of the cost. So I'm now seeing a little bit of gene therapy is an area where multinationals are also looking at.
Excellent, James. Well, I have so many more questions for you, but we really only have time for just maybe one more. And I'd love to hear maybe beyond cell and gene therapy, are there other areas you are excited for new investments? And are there differences between what you're looking for in Europe, the US, and Asia?
Yeah, some of the new areas we're most excited about is the protein engineering area, where the way the proteins are designed, people are thinking of unconventional ways of designing proteins. So that's one area of investment that we are looking at, as because we actually think there are many ways to design proteins to that above and beyond the conventional way of people thinking about the bispecifics, trispecifics, and into a new area. So that's one area that we're truly excited about. Another area where I have actually alluded before, we think gene editing has incredible applications within our industry. And that's one area where we're making a big effort to look at. All right. So I could just point to those two areas as a firm that we're truly excited about.
Excellent, James. Well, that's all we have time for. We look forward to seeing you at the East-West Summit in October in Cambridge. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you then.
Likewise, Jeffrey. Thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thanks for tuning into the BioCentury Show.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the 10th China Healthcare Summit. For a decade, BioCentury, Bay Helix, and Insights partner McKinsey & Company have organized a healthcare summit for biopharma and medtech leaders to discuss cross-border collaboration, investment, and the bridge to innovation in China. For our 10th anniversary, we return to Shanghai to resume in-person networking, live panels, and debate. Join us November 2nd and 3rd for a program designed for C-level executives and investors.